Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Welcome, everyone, to the January 2022 Community IT Innovators webinar series. We're so happy that you could join us today for today's webinar on 2022 IT trends. This is an annual event that we've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years at Community IT, where we take a moment at the beginning of the year to review all of the trends that we're seeing in nonprofit technology and to provide you with some insights on where we see things going with IT. We want to make these webinars as interactive as possible. We have a lot to cover today. There's a lot going on in the world of technology right now. So we have a lot of content that we're going to try to get through. But please don't hesitate to use the Q&A tool as part of Zoom webinars to ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them today during the webinar. We will also be recording today's webinar, and the recording will be made available along with the slides. After the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to our website where the recording can be found. It'll also be posted on our YouTube channel. If you happen to be listening on YouTube right now, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you'll get the updates every time we post a new webinar. And we will also invite you to subscribe to our email list. We don't send a lot of emails, but we just try to keep people apprised of the webinars that we offer every month. So I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO at Community IT and also the moderator for today's webinar series. And I'm joined by Steve Longenecker. Want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Steve. I'm Director of IT Consulting at Community IT. I'm glad to be here today.
Great. And our Chief Technology Officer, Matthew Eshelman. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, it's great to be here, talk about some IT trends. Looking forward to our conversation and any input that you all have today. So great to be with you.
Fantastic. Before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, just a little bit about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations. And our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish their missions through the effective use of technology. We have about 40 staff. We're technology experts, and we are consistently named a top 500 managed services provider by Channel Futures. And that's an honor that we received again in 2021. So let's get into the webinar today. The agenda basically is, well, we always want to hold ourselves accountable. We make these predictions every year, and we're going to look back on the predictions that we made in 2021 and see how we did. And then we'll move into talking about the predicted trends for 2022. And as you can see, we have a very long list, a lot to talk about today. Looking forward to getting into it. So let's start with the 2021 predictions. I will read these and then invite Steve to tell us what actually happened. So what we said in 2021 at the beginning of the year, a year ago, we said that more organizations were going to go serverless. We're going to leave their servers behind once and for all.
We definitely got that one right. We were already seeing that in 2020, so it wasn't hard to predict the trend would continue. It's a slow moving process. If you have a server-based infrastructure that's working for you, there's not necessarily a lot of reasons to change. That's something we do have clients getting away from servers just because, particularly with remote work, having a server in the office can be inconvenient for getting to the files and so forth that are stored there. But a lot of times what we're seeing is that the actual pulling of the plug of the of the server truly going serverless happens with a life cycle changeover. So a server gets to be 5 years old. It's time for it to be replaced, or for its functions to be replaced. And it's at that time that we see the change. So we're seeing this happen. We're going to continue to see it happen. There are clients that are large enough that having it on something on premise still makes sense. So we're not predicting that all of our clients will be serverless by the end of the next year or two, but it's a trend for sure.
And then somewhat related to that, we thought there was going to be some tension between organizations that had a bring your own device policy, where employees were either allowed to or expected to use their own personal computer to do work for the organization, versus having having staff use devices that are owned by the company or the organization.
Matt, I'll let you do some of these, but I'll do this one as well. Yeah, I think we got this one right as well. There was a tension. For the most part, we're seeing still that organizations like to own the laptops, the computers that staff use, and therefore can make sure they have good antivirus on them, they're managed, if they're patched, and all of those things. Mobile devices are often BYOD, bring your own device. At most of our clients, there are some of our clients and some nonprofit organizations that are providing phones to their staff and asking their staff to sort of have a company phone as well as a personal phone and carry both. But that's rarer because I think of the inconvenience of having two devices. But it's also true that this tension, if you will, was manifested more like that. Has always sort of been commonly the case. There have been organizations that say bring your own device when it comes to laptops as well. But that it's definitely true that our organizations are more conscious of the risks of a bring your own device approach, and the fact that there's a lot of data that ends up on personal phones if you don't have any controls in place. And that was something that we saw clients becoming more conscious of in 2021.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's a trend that continued in terms of, I think, the growing awareness that these personal devices are just that, they're personal, and while they are used to access organizational data, that can present a risk to the organization itself. And organizations, I think, as they are being more intentional about cybersecurity and some of the policies around that, I think that the data on mobile devices, will continue something that is reined in as we go over time.
We got rid of the servers. We kept the laptops. What about the phones? We had a prediction that organizations were going to be moving away from traditional telephony. How did that turn out?
That's definitely happened. If you want to use the word traditional telephony, everyone has either already or will soon replace sort of the traditional telephony system with a voice over IP phone, which is oftentimes not even a handset. It's just something that you access on your laptop, or you have a number forwarded through to a different cell number. So we got that, and we got the spirit of the question. That I'm not sure we said it exactly that, but who needs a phone? We got the spirit of that right as well, in that people aren't using those 10-digit numbers very much at all. So it's a rare day that I am talking to a client on a phone number. I have one and use it occasionally, but most of the time I'm setting up a Teams meeting or talking to someone on Zoom. It's not that common that I'm using a telephone number to be in touch with someone. That said, the phone number still remains important. It's something that everyone needs for that occasion. It may not be their main line of doing voice interactions, remote voice conversations, Teams or Zoom or something else may be what's being used for the most part, but you need to have that number for now.
Yep. We also talked last year about data reporting and business automation. We were anticipating a rise in organizations doing more reporting on all kinds of data, the growth of big data. as well as using a lot of the business automation tools like Power Automate. In my, it's a more slowly developing trend than I think we maybe gave it credit for last year. The potential is there, but it wasn't something that took hold in 2021 in our experience. We did, and we'll talk more about this as we discuss 2022 trends, but we also talked last year about sort of the rise of the Microsoft stack versus best of breed solutions, which combine technologies, generally cloud-hosted technologies from different providers. And I don't know if we just want to save our comments on that prediction for the 2022 predictions, or if there's anything to add to that. No, we'll move on. Cybersecurity, we said that was going to be a top IT priority. Matt, what happened with that in 2021?
I think it has been a slow and steady climb. We'll talk about this in more detail. I think, as cyber liability insurance underwriting requirements have changed, I really think that this has pushed a lot of organizations to make more significant investments and become more aware of the risks that they face in that realm. So again, slow and evolutionary. I don't think we saw any really dramatic changes in this area. But again, I'm pleased to see that it did increase in kind of focus and mind share, amongst the nonprofit organizations that we're working with.
And then finally, the last prediction we made was we were expecting organizations to become ever more virtual. Obviously, that's a trend that started with the pandemic in 2020. And I think that's definitely our experience, both at Community IT and with the organizations that we serve. And I think the Delta wave that hit in the summer, in July and August, for us, it was kind of transformative. Up until that point, we'd been thinking, or at least in the back of our minds, had an idea that we'd be going back to the way things were potentially. We wanted to leave that option open to us. We had plans to return to the office, like many organizations did, in the fall of 2021, and the Delta wave just kind of erased all of that and sort of didn't make the decision for us, but it made it clear that we were now kind of moving into the future, and we sort of embraced that. And I think a lot of organizations did as well. We did whiff. I mean, whiff is probably a strong way of putting it. We did not talk about the supply chain challenges. That's been a very real issue in 2021 and will likely continue in 2022. And there were times where it was very difficult to get needed equipment for various IT requirements throughout 2021.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that again, although it's true. It's easy to predict that will continue into 2022. All the headlines assure us that it will. But it was a real big deal to sort of either have to have laptops ordered ahead of time or really, we're hiring someone, 6 weeks from now, we need to order their laptop today. And the other thing to say about this, a couple of other things to say. One is, it was interesting how Apple, because of in various ways, they're sort of insulated from some of this stuff. They're so much more self-contained in terms of their supply chain. They own so much more of their own supply chain. And also, I just think they do things differently in terms of shipping. I know they do things differently in terms of their relationship with China. So for whatever reason, it was interesting that oftentimes you could, getting a Windows laptop, you were looking at lead times that were 4 weeks, 6 weeks, but you could get a Mac laptop much more quickly than that. And the other thing that was interesting was how, because of the supply chain problems on the Windows side, we just saw steady increases in prices through the years. And so our estimates on kind of what you should be spending on a laptop have really gone up significantly. And it's kind of like sort of happened without us really noticing, because it's like a little bit. But now I'm turning around. I'm like, wow, this laptop's a lot more expensive than it was a year ago. Whereas Apple, again, I'm not trying to necessarily overdo the comparisons, but they've had more control of their pricing. And so at this point, it always used to be that I think you still pay an Apple tax if you're an Apple organization because of other costs to being different than everybody else. But certainly in terms of just getting the hardware on your desk, it's very comparable in terms of price now. It's amazing, and the performance of the hardware is terrific as well. So that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the arrival of Apple Silicon with the M1 chip has been a real game changer, because you're getting an incredibly powerful laptop now for probably less than an equivalent Windows laptop. So
absolutely.
Well, let's move on to the 2022 predictions, and the first one that we want to talk about is the rise of Google Workspace. This has been an interesting development for us this year.
Yeah, this fits into the 2021 prediction that that we thought there would be tension between going all in on the Microsoft stack, an integrated stack that goes up and down. You get your Windows operating system, you get your Office desktop suite, you've got your Office email in Office 365, your files in SharePoint, and you even have Azure Identity Services for single sign-on and device management for your Windows computers. Everything's in that stack, and it may not be, each part of the stack may not be perfect, but the fact that there's such good integration between them, it makes it just a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you do this? Versus that best of breed idea that Johan talked about before, where you take the best of each service. So who's the best way for me to do a virtual meeting? I think Zoom's the best. I'm going to do Zoom for my virtual meetings. And then where's the best, file sharing? I think I'll get Box. That seems like that's the industry leader when it comes to file sharing. You put all these things together, Slack for that kind of communications. And you have your best of breed thing. Google Workspace kind of fits into that. They want to provide integration, but they don't really own nearly as much of a stack as Microsoft does. We've always been a pro Microsoft shop. Microsoft was has been and continues to be very generous to nonprofits. And that integration makes it really simple, and simple for small nonprofits can be a very powerful advantage to going with Microsoft all the way up and down. And we also, I think it's fair to say, Community IT grew up with, for years doing Microsoft back when, we would have clients that had Microsoft Small Business Server with Exchange on premise. The email server was in your office, the files were in your office, and you had, Office 2010 or 2007, all of these things. And so the clients that have been on that journey with us all this time, they've always been in Microsoft, and it doesn't make any sense to change. It was in 2021 that I think we really started to see, especially in our sales pipeline, and we brought on a lot of new clients in 2021 that did not grow up in that world. They're new nonprofits. They're nonprofits that, didn't exist 5 years ago. And they're meeting a new need, whether it's protecting democracy in the United States or whatever. They have a different, they start out, and maybe Google Workspace works really well for them. They're not particularly tied to the stack. So we talked about Macs before. If you're a Mac client, then you don't have that need to have tight integration with the Windows operating system. So that's one less advantage to the Microsoft stack. So we've definitely seen a lot of growth in Google Workspace. It was in October of 2020, so more than a year ago, that Google rebranded their G Suite to be Google Workspace. That really signaled a shift in their commitment to the platform, I think, and we've seen a lot of investments from them, and that was something that actually really lacked for a number of years. Google's first and foremost an advertising company, a search company, and I think for a long time this platform that provided services to organizations was kind of a side project. It's still not their breadwinner, but they've definitely committed to making investments in that platform, and it's gotten a lot better just in the last 18 months. So at this point, we are really straddling. I would caution any organization that's on one platform or the other that's thinking, the grass is greener, I want to switch. That the costs of switching are high, and I think both platforms are good. So I would be cautious about switching unless there's really a compelling reason. And I think the most compelling reasons probably are sometimes you find yourself in an ecosystem where everyone around you, and I don't mean everyone in your organization, I mean the organizations that you partner with. So if you're working in a space where all of your other stakeholders, external stakeholders want to keep sharing Google Docs with you, maybe at some point you're like, being in Microsoft is really hindering our ability to partner with other stakeholders that are external to us, and vice versa. But otherwise, I think they're both good platforms. I don't know, Matt, Johan, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's a good overview of the kind of the different platforms. I think we've seen a maturity of Google Workspaces address some of the real underlying weaknesses associated with kind of permissions management and moving away from a completely user-centric model to now giving a little bit more of that traditional kind of file folder permission structure. So not everything is so tightly tied to the individual, and then that user goes away or their account is deactivated, and then there's massive problems that fall away from that. So I think I would say we still see maybe Microsoft as the more full featured. There's lots more kind of bells and whistles there. I think we're certainly seeing almost all organizations are using the Microsoft Desktop Office suite in some capacity, and so it's a very rare organization that's kind of all in on all Google. But I think again, from a management and administration perspective, I think you can do more, and there's more capabilities within Office 365, so maybe there's a little bit higher cost associated with it compared to, I think, some of the management and administration within Google Workspace.
I think that's right. I definitely say that Microsoft 365 remains the more mature product. I guess what I'm saying, and I don't think we're arguing with each other, Matt, is that Google Workspace is definitely good enough. Although, if you want to do some of the things that once you're in Microsoft 365 is like, oh, and we can manage your Windows computers for you, whereas in Google Workspace, it's like there's a little bit of endpoint management. It's more oriented towards Chromebooks and Android phones, and the Windows part is pretty. You might be in that best of breed place where you need to get another endpoint management system if you have Google Workspace, because Google Workspace doesn't provide everything. Whereas Microsoft kind of wants to just keep selling you more and more Microsoft things that can you can almost do everything with Microsoft. That's not quite true, but a lot.
Yeah.
Before we move on, and actually that's a nice segue into the next trend. This is not a trend, but I think it's worth noting that Microsoft has been making some interesting changes to its licensing and pricing for nonprofit organizations. And I'm going to share out a link here of a blog post that we did recently, just kind of outlining some of those changes. And I think that's an important change and trend almost coming out of Redmond for people to be aware of.
Yeah, I think it is worth saying. There were significant revisions to the donation program. I think Microsoft kind of telegraphed pretty well. They think if you're an organization of under 300 seats, they're going to give you the basic tools that they think that you need to be successful as an organization. And the days of getting hundreds and hundreds of free E1 donations, that's gone. They've really pulled that back up into their enterprise agreement customers. And so I think to some extent, we trust Microsoft to continue to have a commitment to the sector with their generous donation programs. I think at the same time, it was really disappointing to see that donation of the EMS E3 SKU go from something that was provided and 50 free licenses were assured that they were going to be there. And then, 2 years later, having Microsoft pull the plug on that, was a surprise. And I think it is a little bit of a realization that, these are donations that are given at Microsoft's, kind of behest, and those things can change. We have confidence that the core platform donations are not going to go away. The Azure donation is not going to go away. But, there have been significant changes to the donation program, from Microsoft.
So let's move on to the next trend. And it's somewhat related, and this has been a game changer in our experience. And it's zero-touch deployment, which I think there may be some other platforms that do this, but the platform provided by Microsoft through its autopilot feature has been really impressive.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think maybe just to build on this, I mean, we did a whole webinar on this feature set later in last
Summer,
year.
I think.
Yep, over the summer, and this has been really fantastic. I think for those organizations that are largely virtual, that are distributed, to be able to ship computers straight from the manufacturer to an employee's house, have them sign on with their username and password, and then automatically have all the programs and applications that they need to be productive, has been fantastic. We've really changed from a situation where computers were set up in the office, whatever, by the MSP or by the in-house IT person, and then handed over to the employee or shipped out. I think there's just been a tremendous efficiency improvements with this really refined process between autopilot and Intune, and then Azure Active Directory, which really backs everything. So again, this is the way that all computer setups are going to be moving forward. And I think you have to be like a really, really big organization to not use this as the default method for how you're doing deployment of Windows computers.
I'll add two things. One, it's not something that you just can just do. You do have to sort of like transition your approach to having Azure AD joined laptops, which is not necessarily as big a shift as it used to be. But if you're completely oriented around domain joined laptops that get all most of their configurations from group policies, obviously these have been tough times for you, because your people have not been probably in the office very, very much, where their group policies are talking to, are being pushed down from domain controllers very easily. So it's a shift. For small organizations, it's not as big of a shift, and it fits in tightly with that going serverless thing that we talked about. The thing I think it's worth mentioning is that we've basically been doing the same thing on the Mac side. It doesn't use Microsoft's products in any way, shape, or form, but for our clients, we manage Macs with Adigy. That's the platform that we use to do mobile device management for Mac OS. And the Apple Business Store, what's called the Apple Business Manager platform. You can basically say, hey, when we when you ship a Mac to us, we want it to automatically enroll in Adigy with this identifier, and then it gets the policies. Again, zero touch. User can just turn on their computer, log in, and it gets going.
Yeah, I think you're that is like the next slide that we could talk about. This, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had one.
You're seeing the future, Steve. It's great. But I think it is true. I mean, I think this has been a good shift. We go from this automated computer deployment and management rollout being really a Windows-centric thing to, if we take a look at the next slide, this is something that's now realistic to do in the Mac world as well. And so Apple, again, revamped their program. I forget what it used to be called. Now it's called Apple Business Manager. But again, it allows you to do a very similar process where you can apply an MDM profile, so mobile device management profile, assigned to a device at the time of purchase. So again, you can buy your devices through Apple Business Manager, ship them to your employee's house. They automatically come enrolled in your organization's MDM profile, and then through that MDM profile, again, standard configurations can be deployed, applications installed, all of that can be deployed, and it has represented a shift. I have down here at the bottom, devices can be re-enrolled into this program retroactively. In the previous iteration of the program, unless you were buying like 20 or 30 devices at a shot, like it didn't really make sense to do. And if you didn't purchase computers through Apple's corporate purchasing program, there was no way to like add them back in after the fact, because the way that Apple did the hardware allocations were, entire regions. So again, if you bought a computer at the Apple Store, that computer was associated with the Northeast region, and there might be 100,000 computers in that group. So you couldn't, kind of back that into your org's management platform. But now it's a lot more modular, and Apple's following the Microsoft lead in terms of you're able to generate a hardware hash, load it up into the system, and then you can tie that device to your organization. So again, what originally was just a Windows thing is now something that can be done for Mac OS devices as well.
And it's great. I mean, it goes well with the new sort of remote and dispersed work situation that a lot of organizations are now experiencing and trying to manage, where you can order and ship devices directly to staff, and as long as they can get on the internet, it's basically going to get automatically configured for them.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.